got an hour with Kath and Matt here to talk about legal research. I want to thank Matt Mirabella for coming along and being our guest speaker for tonight. Matt's one of our own. He's a Jade alumni. I don't know how long you've been out in.
A long time ago, actually.
No, it's not that long.
Not that long ago. A few years.
Yeah. How about I take it upon myself to introduce Matt, and because I can put my own spin on it, and then that allows you to put your own spin on introducing me.
Oh.
But I think I'm bigger than you and I could take you in a fight, so I think we should be fine.
I'll just hand over for anyone who's listening online and you want to ask a question, just do that in the chat box and I'm going to be looking after that so that I can pass on your questions to Kath and Matt.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we won't loop it up. So I don't know how to present in front of people and sit down, so I'm going to stand up. But those of you at home, we've got this the video off, so you're just going to need to listen, and we'll be sharing the screen for most of the time. Before I start, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kath Nolan. For those of you who do, I'm sorry. Matt Mirabella here was one of my first ever students, and I always associate him with one single case. You'll know which one it is because he's got a phenomenal memory. It's the case of Lampley and Braithwaite, because you know how any of you have been with me ever, I can never remember the case names. And I'm like talking about, you know, Lord Muckney Mark is sitting rotting away in jail. It's not even contract law, we're doing competition law, and Matt's like, you know, the supercomputer that is his brain basically pulls out that little bit and says, oh, that must be Lampley and Braithwaite. I'm like, ugh. So anyway.
I've forgotten it by now.
You've forgotten now, but yeah, like when you're a brand new teacher and students continually show you off or show you up, you know, you remember every single one. So, and yeah, so I'm starting with all the things I don't like about math because there's only two of them. The other one is Matt is like, you know, my teaching philosophy is the worst thing that can happen to you in a classroom is I ask a question and you give me the right answer, because chances are you know what the right answer means, but nobody else does, and we miss out on the discussion. So Matt, I got really good at not actually looking at Matt when he's like trying to give me the answer, to the point where I think he thought I didn't like him. But Matt actually used his supercomputer brain to be this university's first ever recipient of the Supreme Court medal. So, which is basically the medal for the person who tops the year in your law school. He went on to be an associate for Marilyn Warren, who was at the time in the last months of being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He then went on and worked with another judge whose name I can't remember as his associate.
McDonald.
Of course you'd remember. Boom, boom. That was the lead up to my joke about your memory.
I should remember the judge I worked with.
And subsequently, he then went as a graduate to the ACCC. But that's basically, when did you graduate, Matt? Must be about 2 years ago?
2016 or 2015 or something like that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to.
Doesn't matter.
I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm, you know, from actually finishing up at uni, you would have had about 3 years of time doing things which as either an associate or in the ACCC. And so usually we have a panel. Unfortunately, our second panelist was unable to join us today. She also is an alumni who has been a Supreme Court Judge's Associate and then went on and worked in a law firm. And the reason for looking for alumni and people who have studied relatively recently is because we're asking you to jump through a whole heap of hoops to do legal research. And there are times when it feels really, really frustrating. And as many of you, or those who know me, know I am not an academic. I am a pracademic at best, and I mean in the sense that I'm a practitioner. So I want to be able to use legal research to actually achieve something, not just to make sure that I get a high distinction instead of a distinction because I remember to italicize things properly in AGL4, or that I have, you know, been able to distinguish between the more recent decision and the later and an earlier decision on some kind of point of law. And so when we started doing these, they've been very much about that practical benefit so that you can see what the benefits are of doing the research that you do. We have another guest who's managed to hide back there. We have Lenny here from the library as well. Actually, I'm going to just hold off on you for a second, Lenny. I do make this stuff up a little bit as I go, and we'll ask Lenny to introduce herself and talk about some of the things she's doing in a moment. We got some questions beforehand. I managed to wipe them somehow, but in no particular order, they appeared to be, how do we start if we don't already have a case name? How do I know if legislation applies to my particular problem if somebody hasn't already told me that there's legislation that applies? I think of those as two sides of the one coin. So that's the, I'm going to approach those two in particular together. And there seem to be lots of databases and tools that do similar things. How do I differentiate between them and how do I use them? And I think there was another one as well, but I've forgotten that.
I don't know whether there's relevant legislation.
Yeah, well, that's right. The relevant legislation, that were the two sides of the one coin. There was another one in there. Hopefully we'll cover it. Shout out if you were the one who was shy enough to put that through. If you want to, like, write on a screen, a piece of paper, if you want to be shy, that's fine. Sneak it up here or just call out as we go. So let's start with that. Sorry, that is annoying, that screen flicking behind me. I might just put it up into there. Just so it doesn't move. I'm not particularly planning to talk about the law of contract. I've just brought up a textbook page. But just let's think about this. You've got a problem. I'm sure you've got lots of problems, but we're only here to talk about a legal research problem. So you've got a problem that you need to solve and it can be solved in the short term. And where do you start? What strategies have you used for starting? Google. So I like that, Anna, you're nice and honest. Lots of people will tell you Google is a terrible place to start. I don't agree with them. I think Google is a really terrible place to finish. I think it's a really terrible place to spend any significant amount of time, but I personally don't have any issue at all with doing what I like to think of as warm-up searches, starting to think about what your topic is and seeing what gets thrown up. So let's just talk about, I love to get Google out of the way really early in the piece. What in your experience have been the problems with using Google, specifically for law?
I can find I get referred to a lot of American cases.
Absolutely, that's exactly where I was going. You particularly get American stuff. Google is an algorithm, right? Nobody really understands how it works, but one of the things we do understand is it prioritizes search results that are more popular. It's kind of like an overrated version of high school. It's just like, you know, the cool kid wears something and so then everybody else wears that thing, so then that thing becomes cool by default. And so, and the search results kind of on Google kind of work the same way. And there are more people using it in America than there are here. One of the really scary things in relation to the US use with Google, or using Google with US legal results, is that the terminology is almost the same. The issues are almost the same. The law works in almost the same way in a number of areas. In fact, it might overlap in some areas and be exactly the same. But you can't necessarily tell that there. So you can go off on what I call parallel lines. You can be heading in exactly the same direction, and Google searches will help you there, and you'll be heading in the same direction. You don't actually meet. It's actually sometimes embarrassing, the number of US cases that I see cited, that particularly with Turnitin being a very, very powerful engine, the number of times that I will see in Turnitin reports swathes of information that have come from US websites. So it's something that you really have to watch out for, because we do see it and we try not to, but we do judge you. In fact, it's kind of our job to give you a mark, clearly, but I will look at that and I see, yes, that this person has cut and pasted something from the American stuff. I get why you do it, but it's that when you're not demonstrating that judicious choice, it can be really important. So Matt, what about you? Where's a place that you start if you've got a kind of problem? It doesn't matter what kind of problem, I'll make one up if you like. What's generally your starting point?
I guess there's a few. Google is one, doing what you were just describing, and what you sometimes find if you put some keywords in, you'll find law firms will have little articles about the topic.
Yeah. So how many of you have come across law firm websites that had useful things in them? Actually, I can.
Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. I've got a cup. I'm going to give you some water from my cup. I just have to, because I've been drinking from the bottle. How many of you have come across law firm websites? Sigrid, you look like you were adding to the conversation, or just, yeah, okay. Sorry, no, I don't have my cup with me.
It's fine. Yeah, that's all right.
They look filthy. No.
So
I don't have
those
anything
articles.
communicable. There's my bottle if you want it.
That's okay. Oh, that's like a hip flask, sort of.
Yeah, if I have vodka in it, only you will know.
Glasses.
Yeah, there's this.
Oh no, it's all right. That's fine. Those articles will sometimes give a summary of the law and some of the cases that are involved, and then when you go to those cases, you can spread out further.
Okay,
So,
great tactic. One of the things I really love is that they identify the cases and they spread out further. Again, we're talking about starting from scratch. What other places can you already think of where you see cases with summary of sort of the law, so you can do that connection piece?
I've actually been using Jade. I know that it's not the best of lot, but there's like random summaries that are really useful in Jade.
Jade, yeah, and Jade has little summary. Well, that particular summary service that Jade has is just pointing to law firm articles. It's just basically, it's like a Pinterest for the daggiest people you've ever met. Like, it's just putting together pages with articles about a particular area of the law, and there are more and more of those that you see. Good thing about Jade is it is actually Australian. But where else? Where do you see case names all the time? Textbook, exactly. Textbook is it's a really solid place to start. The great thing about being at law school, right, is when you get thrown a problem, you immediately know what subject area it's in, right? Because if you're in my contract law class, you're not going to get a mergers and acquisitions problem. Even though, like, I might have written one, you're not going to get one, right? So even if your problem relates to sale and purchase of a business, for example, you know right from the very beginning that it's likely to be the contract law elements. I don't need to go and research takeovers law or whatever, because you know what subject you're in, right? If you get a problem in torts, or you get a problem, it's probably intro is the scariest, a lot of them, there you don't know what the area is. If you get a problem in torts, it's going to be a tort-related problem. And if it's not, you've got someone to complain to, right? So it's pretty easy. However, in the real world, it's very rare that you know for sure when your client walks into your office that it's even a legal problem that they have to deal with. They might be convinced it's a legal problem, but often it's not. So you work with a regulator, so you're working in an area where people are very familiar with the area that they're working in. By the time something gets to you as a problem, it's going to be in a relevant area. So you're at least within a sort of box of information that you'd be dealing with, right?
Usually.
Yeah, usually. Got any examples when that hasn't happened, when you haven't been able to categorise or at least think this is the kind of problem that it should be?
No, not really. You're right. It is in a box, but say there'll be a what appears to be so in what I'm doing, it's Competition and Consumer Act, and quite a lot of it is Schedule 2 to that act, which is the Australian Consumer Law. And you might get a complaint that comes in, talks about conduct that looks like it might be false representations. You might have to actually work out what part of Section 29 that is and whether certain other sections of the ACL apply or not. But you are working within a kind of framework where it's going to be one of those civil liability provisions in the ACL, or if it's competition, it's going to be Section 50 or Section 46 of the Competition Act.
So you know the areas that
you generally know where you're going to look.
And there'll be a team that deals with Section 46 issues. Yeah.
Well, it's actually so because Section 50 is to do with mergers. There's a mergers division for that. But for 46, which is general competition, it could be the enforcement division, or it could be the infrastructure division, where we look at actual enforcement in particular industry areas. So in telcos, for example, which is where I work, I've worked on Section 46 matters and also ACL matters where I work as well. So it's a little bit spread, but there are certain teams that are known that they will be working in either an industry sector across the CCA or in one particular area of the CCA. Yeah.
So again, we're still starting off with a subject area though, and
Yep.
with resources that you can point to that go in that direction. So what have we talked about here? We talked about like, okay, we can identify what subject it is in, so we kind of know which reading list or which textbooks to have a look at. In your, particularly in the court, when you're actually working in the court, where would a starting point for doing additional research start with there?
Well, interestingly enough, quite often, if you've got them already, you might be able to look at the pleadings and submissions that have been sent in by the parties, because depending on what level you're at, if you're in the Court of Appeal, the submissions and the pleadings are usually quite well done by a silk. Sometimes when you're in the trial division, they can be very light on and they might not be helpful, but they'll definitely give you an idea of what the liability is, because they'll have to spell that out in their submissions. They've got no choice. They can't have submissions that don't even tell you what the liability is. So that then tells you, well, it's a case of negligence in the workplace that led to a workplace injury. Okay, so now you know that you're looking at negligence. There's a few cases referred to, so you go to some of those key ones and have a look, see how they might apply. And the other thing that you'll do is, for that, I would use Jade or Osley. They're the two favourites for me. And you can put a case name into that. If you know the case name, you can get there very quickly. And also I'll chat with the judge and he'll come to me and say, in the case of the judge I was working with, he would come and say, I'm working on this negligence matter, but I want, he'll ask me to look at a particular tiny little problem within that hasn't been looked at much before. There might not even be a case on it. And he'll ask me to go away and do some research on that. But all of the materials that I've got from the parties will help as a starting point.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's using a starting point, but then using that to get further in.
And that's this next thing I really wanted to talk about, is where you start matters to an extent, it's where you finish up that really matters. And so sometimes I like to think about research as a journey and understanding what it is that you're trying to get out of that journey, what your destination is. Is it simply answering the question, knowing what the law is and being able to apply it to a set of facts, which is often what it is in assignment tasks that you have to do? Is it demonstrating some kind of critical analysis? Is it thinking about what the law should be, which is one of the criteria, the learning objectives for pretty much every subject that you do? It's actually in the real world, unless you are actually unique like Matt, where you get to work with a judge who actually gets to decide what the law should be. within limited parameters, or you're doing policy work of some sort where you get to advise a regulator what the law should be, and the regulator, if they're lucky, gets to convince the minister, and the minister, if they're lucky, gets to then put it in a bundle of other legislation which may or may not, well, these days Jackie Lambie decides everything, doesn't she? So if Jackie Lambie thinks it's a good idea, then it will become the law. Oh, okay, I'm getting off track already. So again, what the law should be is an important part of what you guys need to do, because you're doing a master's degree. You need to show synthesis, you need to show critical analysis. So we do need to think about, well, how do you work out what you think the law should be? So I want to circle back to that as well. But big part of that can be identifying where there are gaps in the law, where there isn't an authority that is on point, or where in particular the world has sailed on and it's being regulated in a way that doesn't recognise the change. So that's one of the things that we have to think about. So just starting with starting points, actually now is really a good time for me to introduce Lenny, looking very relaxed back there on the chair. Lenny, I'm sorry, your surname has just gone from my head.
Oh, because it's hard. It's De Vries, which is a Dutch name.
I like it. So this is Lenny De Vries. Thank you. And he's a Dutch student who can just will be able to say beautifully. So, Sigrid, Lenny.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, now they're going to talk about us and we won't know what they're saying. Well, I won't. So Lenny, actually, I'm going to ask her to introduce what she does, but she's at the moment our library liaison person. There's some stuff that's changing, and in particular, there's some stuff that we'll be able to do in Canvas with your access to the library, which I should have been marking papers this afternoon and got a bit excited about and went off on a tangent to explore that. But I'll let Lenny talk to you about what the library does and where to work with them, and then I'll show you some of the things that the library has.
So I'll just only be very brief. So my name is Lenny again. Just remember my name, because if you need any help from the library, I'm your contact person. So I'm officially the library business partner for the College of Business. So I am here for you guys. So use me. Best way to find me is just to me, RMIT, Lenny, Lenny. There's only 2 Lennys in the whole of RMIT, and I'm the De Vries one. So that's, I'll leave some cards as well. So what I thought, I don't want to go and take over the great train of thought that's happening here, but just to show you something that's going to be useful for you if you do need help from the library in the future. Just like Steph kind of, is very instrumental in setting up sessions. If you ever need help with anything, you want to have a workshop or a class on some research subject or anything, just I'll show you how to get about that. So if you're going into the library.
Just here. You can use your finger on my screen.
Fancy.
I even cleaned it earlier.
So this is the main page. We try and make it very simple. So if it's to do with research, you just scroll down. It's very simple. There's a study area, teacher area, and a research area. You just click on the bottom thing of the research. And then, as you can see here, it says request research advice. You click on that, it goes to a form. Very simple form, just fill it out, send it off, and they'll get back to you. So, and this could be any kind of question you have about research, you can send it there. So just go to the library page, go to research, click on that form. If you want to set up a bit of a bigger workshop with a group of people, can be 2 or 3 people, can be bigger. Strangely enough, with your graduate students, you have to go to the teach section. So here, and then just click on that link, takes you to another form to, you click on here, and it takes you to a form to request a session, whatever it is.
Isn't it amazing how you can look at it? I can't get into the website without actually going to that page every day. I've never noticed that there was a section on teaching. Never know. It's just gone. Is it? I'm assuming
Yeah.
it's not new because I usually notice when things change. But so it's really easy to not see what resources are available to you.
Yeah.
And similarly, the over in the library in the study area there, they have some great drop-in resources. So particularly for people who are not writing in their first language, writing is such a tool of a lawyer's trade, and being able to spend a little bit of time getting somebody to help you, particularly with structuring and the writing one-on-one, is just such a great resource. So there are lots of resources around that you might not be aware of.
And RMIT is super active in peer mentoring, but I'm just finding out that it's not so big in the law course, but they're starting that. So start of next year, there'll be peer mentors for the Juris Doctor program and other ways. So we're launching an app pretty soon, and I'll send the info to Steph and maybe you can pass it on. And in the app, you can request help from a peer mentor. So it's a free service, and you sit down with a student who's already gone through it. So it's really cool. So that's going to start up and be great help for you guys. So finally, I'll back to you, is help with databases. Now you can go there in two different ways. You can go to databases, or you can go to subject guides. So I think
I was going to take them to the subject guys, so you are just okay.
Nice to meet you all.
So I'm going to sit down to do that rather than to. And by the way, just sing out as we go. So I must admit, I tend to go straight into the library and to the library search box. I'm a big fan of sticking in some words and seeing what comes out. And that was one of the other things I was going to show you with Jade as a good starting point. But the library has curated this fabulous set of resources here under legal research methods. I think they were originally put together for the legal research methods subject, which is a compulsory subject that you do towards the end of your degree. But it was pretty easy to see that there are benefits in having that information with us early on. And from here, we've got access to legislation, cases, books, journals, whatever it is. So we'll go through some of these things in just a minute. But I wanted to throw back to Matt and ask a question that I ask every time we have somebody come and join us for this kind of thing. Is there a tool in your work, either now or with the court, that you use all the time or more regularly than others?
Well,
it's okay for the answer to be no, and people to learn that they have to keep being in touch with new tools.
Yeah, obviously Google, we use it all the time, but that's not what you're getting at. I think in terms of the legal databases, I tend to use Jade a lot now because I can just...
Did you use Jade when you were at law school?
Not as much. I used to use Ostley a lot. I still sort of use Ostley a bit, but I used Ostley because I liked the simple layout and the fact that you just get a case and it's there. But I now think I prefer Jade because it does seem to have more, for some reason I think it has more cases, and you can, on the right-hand side, you've got a download the original document, and I always find that useful. I don't like to...
Let me bring up Jade and we'll just have a look at it while we're talking about it. So
I use it a fair bit, but I actually think that, so where I'm working now, I think having a copy of Miller's is really, really useful.
So Miller's is, Miller is the name of the author or the key editor for a consolidated guide to the legislation. And it's effectively like it's annotated legislation. So it's like going into one of the databases like LexisNexis or Westlaw, pulling up legislation, seeing what the clause or the section is, and then having some annotation with that explains it, and most importantly, lists cases where it's been cited. So that you can then go and see how the courts have interpreted the words and in what industries it's been relevant and similar. So again, that's Miller's is what used to be the Trade Practices Act and is now the Competition and Consumer Act, is one of the fattest pieces of legislation, if you're going to reduce it to paper, that we have. Miller's, when I last looked at the full version, was over 2 volumes anyway, isn't it? It's a big
I don't
fat.
know. I've got the 2019 one and it's 2,000 pages, but I'm not sure it's in 2 volumes. I think,
So I think
but it's big.
yeah.
But I don't refer to all of it. See, as I said before, it's for us, it's either section 46 or 50, or it's the ACL, which is 29. There's not much else, but I will say that almost every piece of legal research I've done while I've been in where I work now, the starting point has been something to do with Miller's, or the person has suggested a case that becomes the starting point. But don't one mistake that you can make is you can be working with Miller's, and if you're working with a version that's a couple of years old, you might miss something.
Yeah.
So you really you have to use the latest version, and you also have to go to Jade and look at a case that Miller's might mention. Look at that and see if anything superseded it or come after it.
Well, can I just demonstrate that? Sometimes that's the easiest way. So going into Jade, again, I use Jade a lot, so I'm probably more familiar in this environment than I am with most of the other databases. But again, we tend to get our favourites. And one of the questions was, why do you pick them? In some cases, it's actually just plain old ordinary habit. And it's interesting that then people, for some reason, will switch to another database and then they get just more familiar with that. And remember, in practice, just like as students, you're under pressure all the time to do something quickly. And so familiarity and knowing where to look for something helps you move quickly through things, but limits your ability to see the differences. So Jade is particularly good with Commonwealth legislation and cases. Victorian, well, legislation generally it's quite good with, and it's very good with Victorian decisions. Actually, probably what I would say is my experience is that there are quite a few New South Wales decisions in particular that aren't in there. That Ostley is usually, in my experience, I'm more likely to find, particularly Supreme Court decisions. And because I'm often teaching in, I'm lucky if we have a case from the 80s. So more recently, I suspect that they're pretty good, but the old stuff, often the case itself isn't there. So with Jade, one of the first things that you can do is it's kind of got, my friend who used to work at Jade calls it the idiot box at the top. You just type in something and like Google, it comes up with potential answers. So I put in Competition and Consumer Act and it shows me, it's got a document in Jade. It's actually got the legislation, but down here, we've got some other things. So if I were, for example, had a problem, I think I poisoned my husband, I want to know what's going to happen if I've poisoned him and it's murder. So murder, poison, Victoria, I thought I would find something pretty quickly there. It just wants me to do a Jade search, it'll come up and immediately it gives me a list of cases that have got that. Now, again, I quite like that. Sometimes when I'm thinking, what kind of problem? I think I want a problem involving, I don't know, Bitcoin and misleading, deceptive. I have no idea if there's anything in there. Just do nothing. What do you know? So you're not going to get that in an exam question from me because usually I find a nice case that's got a couple of interesting facts and fit them around. So you can start off, of course, actually using spelling misleading. So I'm now interested in whether there's been, what do you know? 4 different cases that deal with misleading and deceptive and have some sort of reference to Bitcoin. The other thing that I could do here is we might say Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So again, Boolean search techniques used. I now get a bigger and actually I'll just put and misleading. See what happens. We narrow our search a little bit. In fact, we narrow it to the point where if we haven't got both of those words, we don't have anything in there. Or I might have spelled it badly again, we don't know. So that's a good place to start. But let me just go back to the Competition Act. In fact, often it'll work, by the way, with common abbreviations as well. So, or not, as it did there. What's there? I think TPA will find it. There we go, Competition and Consumer Act by TPA. It's made for barristers, most of them are old. So, and when we bring it up, we can see there's a couple of different panels. So firstly, with any piece of legislation, you will get the table of contents, and as you scroll down, long piece of legislation. In fact, I won't use it because it's too long. I'm going to go to the Electronic Transactions Act. I'll pick Victoria. So I just know it's a nice piece of short legislation. So we've got our table of contents at the beginning, and we can just scroll down and we can look at the law. The next thing that is worth noticing is there's a couple of tools on this side. So this box up here, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. You can see here a couple of different things. Firstly, my personal favorite, you can, I'll need to make it smaller. You can copy the name. Okay, so you get it right. You can decide if you want it formatted, AGLC4, if you want the link included or not included. You can hit the little copy and you can paste it into your document, and it's done the work for you. If you get nothing else out of that, those little clicks will make you happy. I know it took me a long time to notice that that was there. All good? I move fast, Steve. You've got to be up.
Yeah,
Book, book, book.
very slow.
So then the next sections here that I think is important is it tells us which sections have been cited. Now it works on this logic, which some databases use and some don't. But the logic is that if a case is cited, or a piece of legislation, it's very rare that the whole thing is relevant every time it's cited. And that unlike most of you, that when they're cited in a court, the judge will, or in a decision, the judge will pinpoint. So what Jade does, which is why I like it, is it pinpoints to the relevant section, and you can find it in a few different ways. So if you keep reading about this act, what are we looking in the end? Electronic Transactions Act, and you think it's coming up all the time, what's important about it? One of the things we can tell just from looking at that is sections 2, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12 are probably not that important, okay? But the other sections have been cited. So as we look at it, we can say, okay, let's go and have a look at section 13 and see how it's cited. Now, what you'll see down on the side is taking you directly to the section. Now, I'm probably doing this a little bit asked about. If you're doing this with a case, it's particularly useful because it will take you to the bit of the judgment that the textbook or the other judgment is referring to, which helps you work out what's likely to be one of the most important things. Now, often you can't, you've got to look at it in context. You won't get everything there, but it's giving you a clue. Now, particularly, have you ever come across a short competition case, Matt?
They're usually pretty long.
Some competition, especially the ones from the 80s and 90s, they will go for 300 pages. They are massive. Those of you in my contract class or have them will know I go on and on and on about Justice Kirby's decision in Woolworths. For those of you who aren't, just write it down now so you can show off later, where he talks about the reasons why we don't, that it's not for the courts to consider whether or not consideration is sufficient. So courts don't look at the value of a transaction, they just look at whether value changes hands, for want of oversimplification. One of the reasons for that is we would be tied up in court for years and years and years as we had expert evidence to come in to work out about value. And that's in fact what actually happens, particularly in competition cases. So you will have transcripts that go on and on and on as you've got everybody's expert pitted against everybody else's expert, and huge amount of economic analysis in the cases. So as we end up in the so this case, again, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it on the screen. You can see there are these little things. They're supposed to look like paper clips. They show you against the section what the citations are. So you can drop that down and we can see that that section is referred to in this piece of legislation. We can see it's referred to in this other piece of legislation. We can see that it's been referred to in this case, and it gives you there a little summary of what the reference is, and you can click on it and go and have a look at it. And it will take you, sorry, I've expanded, it'll take you to the section. The other thing that will happen, sorry, going back to this box, as it tells you when the most recent citation was. We've now flipped to a, did we flip to a case? Yes, we've flipped to a case. It'll take you to the most recent citation of that case. You can download it and read it in full if you wish, or you can go to the citator or the citation report. So I'll start with the citation report. What a citation report does is it shows you cases that cited the decision and cases that this decision cited. It also gives you the legislation. So why is that useful? We can see trends. So let's pick a case. I just spoke about Woolworths, didn't I?
So while you're doing that, that's a good way that if you find a case in a textbook from a little while ago,
Yes.
and you're wondering whether something else has come along since, this will show you whether that case has been cited by something in the future. And whenever there's a change in the law, usually the previous case will be cited at some point. So it's helpful to make sure you're working with the latest authorities.
Absolutely. So Carlisle and Carbolic Smoke Ball. I'm going to use that as a decision. It's not in Jade. I don't think it is anyway. Do the search. We end up then with a list of things in the Jade database that refer to that case. So what I can do is just go, actually I probably could have done it straight in the citator. It's just listing them at this stage. We can change the order, we can have a look at how they work. But if I go into the Jade citator and put that in, somebody who types better than me would, and I can decide things like, actually, I don't want all citations. I'm only interested in High Court or Appellate Court mentions of that case, okay? Because I'm guessing that I'm going to get a lot of stuff and I'm lazy. I don't want to read lots of different things. And I could ask for particular text or a particular judgment or whatever, but I don't care at the moment. I'm just going to search. What's it telling me I'm doing wrong? I can't talk and search. Okay, please enter the name of the citation of the legal resource that I'm interested in. Okay, I actually need to put the citation in. Okay, let's do it this way. I checked it with Cahill before I left. There it is. There's my citation. Just going, there'll be a lot of them that come up.
On the left side, is that it? Oh, there.
Yeah, there it is. So I can just click. Oh, just allow me to copy it that way. Oh, yeah, it also allows me to show if you've got paid versions of it and it's integrated, you can actually, so which the way that this works, by the way, with Jade offers additional features for their professional users, which include things like making your own notes in those citations, being able to share with other people. My personal favorite, being able to upload a document and it fixes your citations for you. Or checks that they're real. And yes, by the way, I have the professional version and I do upload some essays when there are links or cases that just make no sense to me. And yes, some people do make them up and yes, they do get caught. So just thought I'd give you everything there. What am I trying to do? I'm just trying to like that. I want the citator. Okay, citations of, what's happening? Do you know why it is? It's because I'm in the incognito version. Square bracket. Sorry, I'll just do this. It will be worth it, I promise you. 1892, close square bracket, EWCA Civ 1. There we go. Search. And now it's going to give me a citation report of everything down to a summary of the paragraphs where that was discussed. So one of the things this particular database doesn't do is distinguish obiter from ratio. It basically just takes the references and you get to work that out yourself, because it says that it's appropriate to do it that way. It's saying it's not giving legal advice. Others will do that. The other thing that it also doesn't do is it doesn't say whether it's current or it's been overturned. So you need to use the case citator to have a look at that. I've just been reminded that I'm running out of time, which I knew would happen very quickly. So that's part of using that database, and that's some of the strengths that that particular one has. Let me go back into some of these other library tools. So when do you think that you would be looking at journals? Matt, do you get to look at journals very often?
It's not very often really, and I don't think I have. I might have looked at a couple for the judge, but they didn't end up being that useful to him. It was mostly primary sources, so legislation and cases, sometimes cases outside the jurisdiction.
Yep.
In one case, I went so far afield that I ended up making reference to a case in the Massachusetts District Court over the particular definition of a term that didn't exist in any Australian decision. Didn't help in the end, but not so much the journals. So
journals do tend to be something that we're using particularly in an academic sense.
You would, yeah.
Sometimes in practice you might look at a journal, although to be frank, you would probably give, and this will sound wrong in an academic context, but you would probably give more weight to something that a law firm published as opinion, because a lot of stuff these days in new areas of law, it's not going to litigation. It's going to private arbitration. So the 5 people who know everything that there is to know about cryptocurrency and misleading and deceptive statements and taxation of bank fees and how those 3 things fit together, they're not sharing that with the world. That intellectual property of how those transactions work, what kind of disputes people have, they're litigating it through arbitration or mediation in private somewhere, and they're maintaining their expertise. So as the world gets more and more open, in some ways it gets more and more closed.
Although the thing about that is, though, that a court might decide differently if something was brought to a court. Might not always go in the same direction as some of those mediations.
Yep, that's true.
So,
it might, but until they get there, you don't know. Yeah. So one of the things that Matt said that I really want to point out, there's a really good early tool. I think of tools as early and late, stuff to get yourself started, make sure you're on the right track, and the stuff that you need to really refine. A really good early tool is a dictionary. The Encyclopedia of Words and Phrases, your law dictionary, but even your standard everyday language dictionary can help you a great deal. A large part of the marking criteria that we have in every law subject is about using technical language the right way. So being able to explore, has a word or a phrase been judicially considered? So if you've got a particular statement in your problem or in your document, it is worth working out whether or not a judge has in the past said this is what it means. So a good example of that, and if you really have not enough to do after this, go and have a look at the phrase time is of the essence. It's one that's been considered so many times that it becomes a kind of shorthand, that if you say time is of the essence, or another one might be without prejudice, one that you will come across a lot when you do legal practice management, where the term itself then carries all of that prior history and the judgments with it. So using that is really helpful. And I've just got to remember the encyclopedias and dictionaries are all here, which leads me to the other starting point. Both Paulsbury's and Laws of Australia can be fabulous help start points. They're as good, sometimes even better than the textbook. Okay, we're dealing with an equity and trust problem because it's given to me in equity and trust. I read the relevant chapter. I can go back through the index of the book and have a look to see where that sends me, and then start to make a list of the cases that seem to be on point. Then I can go to the cases, see whether they've been subsequently decided, and have a look at the journals to see if anybody who's writing a journal articles has written about that in some way. So we tend to move from the secondary source to the primary source. The next thing actually I also want to point out is that secondary primary source distinction is really important. And just as the judges go up the tree in their hierarchy, there's a real hierarchy of evidence that you can use to support your arguments. Now, in my subject contract law, you can throw Carl Hill and Carbolic smoke ball at it and chances are it'll stick. You can use that case as authority for almost everything. So you pretty much know if you don't throw a pinpoint reference in as well that tells me which bit of that case you're referring to, I'm not going to be impressed. I'm pretty hard to impress anyway in my own way. So you've identified the case. It's good for you to identify a case because that is your primary evidence. Sometimes we need to go through the secondary evidence to get there, but think about it, that's how any research works. We use anecdotal references, we look at what's in the newspaper, we make decisions about how the world works, and then you take that and then you try and find the real evidence that supports that. It's interesting when you can't. It's interesting when there are differences. And it's just supporting your statement of fact when you find something that's primary that makes sense. So the way I see it, it's not hard to work out when you need to cite something. If you are making a statement about what the facts are, you need to support it. So that I'm not talking about the facts in your problem. I'm talking about this is what the law is. The law is murder is bad, or whatever the equivalent is in the Crimes Act. So yeah, murder is illegal. That is a statement of fact, right? It needs to be supported by a source. What kind of source would support that? Sure, you read it in a textbook. Well, maybe we could go up the track. You saw it on TV, probably not a really good source. You read it in a textbook, better, but not awesome. There are all of these cases where somebody was found to commit murder, but all they are is examples of the enforcement of the law. There is a provision in legislation that says that. That is your primary source, and that will have more weight than any of those other things, even though you might have started your understanding that murder was illegal based on too many Law and Order episodes when you were young. Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
Good to know. So going backwards through these resources can be really helpful. How much time? I thought we had until 20 past. Do we have we've only got an hour.
Someone said it was 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we've got an hour. Sorry, I've not timed myself. I thought I had a whole hour and a half.
We could go to the room.
But what I would like to, before we throw it to the room, what I would like to do is just ask Matt one question very quickly.
Yep.
You've been out in the big wide world. You were good at research at uni. There's no doubt about it, because you wouldn't have got the results that you did if you weren't.
And was I good in the real world?
No. Well, you can answer that as well. But my question was, is there any one particular thing that you learnt doing research at uni that has been really useful to you in the work that you've done since? Or conversely, is there any one thing that you kind of glossed over and you didn't do as much of that. Now that you think about it, you know it would have been really helpful to have been better at that.
I can probably answer both of them. The first one, I would say, other than using Jade and Ostley and all that, which is what I did use, is one of the
Can I ask
things.
you to be a bit louder? I'm seeing people
Can you-
sit their ears.
yeah.
Just, yeah, can you use your big outdoor voice?
So one of the things that that I found particularly useful is making really, really, really good notes from the lectures, from the textbook, just the notes that you use in the exams, making really, really good ones that have the cases in there, actually provided me with a really good alternative starting point. If I didn't have another starting point, I would go to my notes in contract and look at a case in there, then use Jade to find that case, and then that becomes, it's fast tracking that starting point.
That's actually, that is sensational advice.
There's one problem with it though, is that as time goes by, those notes become older and older. So that's something to be aware of. But, you know, I graduated in 2016 and I'm still looking at my notes as a starting point for a lot of things.
I think one of the reasons I think that that's sensational advice is that you have one superpower when you come into working in a law firm or as a judge's associate or whatever you're doing with research after you graduate, and that is that you have been researching more recently than the person who is asking you the question. You are, or you should be, more familiar with the electronic tools than they are, and you've thought about the first principles much more recently than they have. And you very quickly forget what you know, like just try and, that's why I always think it's good to do a bit of reflection along the way. You know, you start your law degree and by the end of the first semester break, you're actually way more aware of all of the things that you don't know than you were at the beginning of your law degree, because actually counterintuitively you've learnt more stuff. So you're more aware of those things, you have those tools, and going back to first principles is a superpower that they tend to lose. So it is actually really, really good to remember that.
But your notes mean that you don't have to remember everything, because if you've got really good notes that were useful to you in an exam, then they'll still be useful to you a couple of years later.
Yeah.
When the judge asked me to look at something in employment law, I had my notes from labour law when I did my course here, and they were starting points, and I was able to mention to him a case very quickly, and he was impressed at the fact that I knew it straight away. But it was just because it was part of the notes. And then, of course, the real research came after that. And in the end, the advice I gave him wasn't anything like my notes, but the notes was the starting point. So that's something that I use. The thing that I probably could have used more when I was at uni that I didn't, and now still don't use much, are all those little tooly, the parts of Jade that you were showing before, where you can do sort of elaborate sort of cross-referencing, and I don't do much of that. I tend to download the actual decision and read it or skim it. And I do that because when I was with the judge, I wanted to rely on my own assessment of what the authority was, and I wanted to write my own advice for him that pinpointed. I didn't want to rely on a database to do a lot of that cross-referencing, but I can see there's value in it, and I'd never really looked at it much before. So that's probably something worth playing with. But depending on the forum, who you're doing your research for, whether it's a judge or whether it's for in a workplace, whether you've got other people that's collaborating on it or not, that makes a difference in terms of how careful you have to be about the advice you give. And when I was working with the judge, I had to be pretty careful.
I would hope so. I would hope so.
I had to really read the cases. Yeah.
So again, and I do know, sorry, I really did misjudge because I really thought we had another half an hour. The last point I just wanted to make sure that we cover, and I'm very happy to answer questions and show other databases in that kind of detail for anybody who wants to stick around for the next 20 minutes when we finish. But I just wanted to cover off, once you've gone through the process of collecting a whole lot of research, what do you do with it? How do you translate it into those notes that you need for exam, as Matt was saying? what kind of things are you doing now? When you gather information, are you bookmarking it? Are you writing it on post-it notes? Do you have really elaborate tattoos? No? Any ideas anybody want to share? I'll share with you some of the things that I do, which are a bit hacky around the edge. Can you not really listen to this bit, Lenny? Because it's probably not important, like not kosher. There are some things that we have here that are really good to use and really sophisticated. My own advice is if you are not comfortable with technology and or you're into your second year or onwards of your degree, I would not bother with EndNote. But if you feel comfortable enough with tech and you're really early on, being able to use something like EndNote, which is available to all students free of charge through the library, you will create your own personal database that, with a bit of technical legal expression is fucking around, you will be able to put those citations into your materials in the proper formats and things like that. And if you keep notes as you go, you kind of have your own personal database that you can print out every which way, and that will be fabulous. There are similar tools to EndNote, which I think there's one called Zotero or something like that. Then there are the hacks. Anybody use Evernote? Have you come across Evernote? Yeah, see, once you know Evernote, you're a happy person. So Evernote is a free online, pretty much unlimited overall tool, which is actually, to be fair, I think it's called OneNote, is like a Microsoft sort of mini version of it, which again, because you're students here, you get access to the full Microsoft suite of products. And I've been using Evernote for a long time. I can't see any point in changing, but it does a sort of similar thing. In Evernote, you can create little notebooks, and then you have pages in the notebook. So if I were, for example, let's find us something here that I'm looking at Hallsbury's. I've found something here that I'm interested in. Just want to drill down till I get to something. Oh, by the way, browsing through an encyclopedia is not a stupid way to find something. If you know you need to deal with trespass, and it's trespass to do with fences or something, actually browsing through and finding it is not a stupid way to do it. But once I've found the thing I want, I've just got a little thing set up on my browser to clip things to Evernote. Oh, wouldn't you know it? Have to sign in. By the way, if you haven't got LastPass, you're missing out. And basically, mine's set up so that it takes all of the formatting out, creates a little page like that, and I can then save it into Evernote. You can also clip in handwritten things. It's got, again, there's a paid and a cheaper version. I like supporting people who make awesome software, so I do have the paid version of this one. And with the paid version, you can search across documents that inside your links to. So you can just keep uploading your PDFs, you're searching for trespass and fences, and you will find everything. I would bring mine up, only God knows what will be in there, because everything in my life gets thrown into Evernote. You can also even create an email address that's unique to your Evernote account, and so subscribe to law firm websites, throw in your Evernote account, they send their newsletter directly to you, you don't even read it, and later on you're searching for something and up pop all of Mallison's or Allen's, or that's how old I am, I use the old firm names. They pull those things up. So Evernote is a great way to keep things and to store it and restore it. A recent favourite that I have is this thing called Wakelet. And Wakelet, I'd have to log into it, but Wakelet is a bit like Pinterest again. It's just basically you can create little pages and just you just draw in the tabs, the website pages, or upload documents to it, and it keeps them in really nice little ordered packets. And sometimes that is the trick for what it is that you need to do, is not only find the thing, but later on be able to collate them and pull them together. So I think when you're doing research, you do need to think of two sides to this. Not only what am I looking for, but how am I going to find it and make sense of it at the end? I'm also a big fan of mind maps and the odd piece of paper on a back of a cupboard door. So that kind of thing is really handy. But you guys will have your own tips and tricks, and there's no way that a woman in her 50s is going to know more than you guys about online tools for storing and keeping that information. So think about it and think about what you're coming up with and how to do it. All right, so we need to finish at 6, but then I'll hang around for 15 or 20 to deal with some additional questions. So if anybody needs to go. For those of you in my class, I will see you in half an hour, and if I've seen you in here and you're going now, I know. Thank you very much for coming over, Lenny. For those, and we've got a question online by the looks of things too. Is it? Oh no, is that just you?
No, that was me just asking.
All right, cool. Sorry, I just didn't look at that. Okay, questions. Anything? Do you need to head off, Matt?
No, I can just let them know I'll hang around for another 5 minutes.
Okay, beautiful. Any questions or anything else that you want me to demo as we're doing this?
But my question was, if you want to find out all the decisions of various rulings on a particular case, is there a way to actually have them all this? For example, Yahoo and Peculiar, there's one case that is like 55 different ones that go on through. Is there a way to actually list all of them?
Yeah, good way. So let me look at this. Let's go. I'll go competition and consumer law. Actually, why don't I just do TEA section 52, even though it's not that anymore. I reckon it's going to find it for me. So I know it's gone to section 52 instead of section 18. So I think I've said in class about 7,000 times that section 18 of the competition and consumer law is one of the most litigated sections ever anywhere. So what I'm going to do is prove that's right. I've gone to schedule 2 of the consumer law, to the Australian consumer law. We'll sit there and have a look at section 18. I should have tested this earlier.
That's because every time there's a misleading and false statement, it's also misleading and deceptive. So 18 is tacked onto that as well.
Yeah. What can you remember what chapter it's in?
Chapter
2 or
it's
3?
in schedule 2.
Yeah, schedule 2, chapter
2.
Chapter 2, misleading or deceptive conduct. Here we are. I'll go with section 18. There are 3,123 citations. So if we go and have a look at that, that's actually not really manageable at a guess. So let's go and look at it in the citator. So you can move backwards to there. Does that make sense to you? So we're just looking at every single citation. Quite frankly, the number of citations doesn't necessarily equal the quality of citations. So again, we've got this whole list. And you can then refine it down. So from there, but yes, you can get a list of everything. And if you go to sections of legislation or to the section, to the cases, go through that way, you will find all of the, well, not all of them, but you will find a mighty list. So, and the other databases do something pretty similar. So I know in Westlaw and also Casebase will just give you the citations with all its myriad of little symbols that give you a sense of where things fit together. But again, the fact that it's been cited a lot gives you an indication that it is important in some way. It doesn't tell you whether it's important because it's an authority, it's important because it's bullshit. It just gives you some sort of idea that it's important. And in areas that are changing all the time, you'll find that they'll be distinguished a lot more. So again, often when you're researching, you're looking for ways to distinguish one case from another. So try to find things that might have similar. So then using that open search, look for similar facts in different areas to see how they're treated differently can help you there as well.
there's no other questions. I just want to thank Matt again for coming along. We've got a little gift card
Oh,
as
thank you.
a thank you
Thanks for that.
from the school and from the LSS.
Okay.
We're going to be making all your wisdom available with the recording that Kath's been taking care of. So thanks to Kath as well.
Pleasure, treasure.
And I'm going, if you want to sign up, I can get in touch with you about tonight's event, a summary and a link to the recording.
Yeah.
And just touching on what Lenny pointed out, if you're ever interested in following up and learning more about legal research and might be interested in getting together with friends and requesting those library services together, but you don't know if anyone else is interested, I'm happy to facilitate that. I'm the education director, so happy to be a point of contact, or you could just take yourself directly. But thank you very much to Kath and Matt.
No problem.
No.
So, thank you all. Yeah, and like I said, I'm happy to answer. Well, yeah, I've got about 5 minutes to answer questions before I have to go and set up for another class. So, thank you very much, guys.
And I'll just while you're packing up, feel free to keep going. I'll just talk. This week we're doing Mental Health Week for the LSS Equity, so feel free to come by, grab a cookie, and grab some resources. We've got information on how you can get 10 free
Thank you so
sessions
much,
under
Matt.
Medicare card, or you get how you can access counselling and
Well, it's
RIT.
kind of the nature
We've got a
of
little
these. So I'm always like worried when we have too many
I know
people. It's like,
everyone's
I've got to get through all these things.
You wouldn't have been able to do much if you had more people.
Tiny little size of the children's points.
Time of the essence. Yeah. Time of the essence. And
Well, the most important
That's why I said you didn't need to do much prep.
they need to realise that they're not
time of the
school.
essence.
Yes.
You make good exam notes. Doesn't it? Anyway,
I'm just going to turn my.
I did find
Natalie,
out-
I'm going to close this meeting down now. Thanks for your time. See you later.
I did find out something about DLR, actually. I'll tell you.
Just let me.